Thank you so much for joining us today and connecting with us. I am the fellow coordinator of the Knowledge Societies and Education Working Group of COMEXI. It is an honor to have two great men today to talk about a fundamental topic nowadays, innovation. So I will introduce Dr. Alper and Dr. Alcocer. So Dr. Alper, currently, he is spearheading the Global Excellence Initiative by the former Governor General of Canada, David Johnston, to enhance global recognition for Canada research excellence. He's a chair of the Canvassing Committee for the initiative. He's also Distinguished University Professor of the University of Ottawa. The basic research Alper has been pursuing spans organic and inorganic chemistry with potential application in the pharmaceutical, petrochemical, and commodity chemical industries. He discovered new reactions using homogeneous phase transfer and heterogeneous catalysis. He created new highly chemoselective argocarbonylation and aminocarbonylation processes of importance in a drug natural product synthesis. Alper was pioneer in the application of phase transfer catalysis to transitional metal catalyzed organic reactions. I hope to say it okay. He has published 552 papers, has 37 patents, and has edited several books. In 2000, the Governor General of Canada presented him with the inaugural Gerald Hesberg Canada Gold Medal in Science and Engineering, the most prestigious award for science and engineering in the country. He has served as chair of boards and committees, including, among others, the Partnership Groups of Science and Engineering, the Canadian Research Knowledge Network, and he was president of the Royal Society of Canada. He was appointed inaugural chair of the Government of Canada's Science, Technology, and Innovation Council, which provides advice to Cabinet, the Prime Minister on science, technology, and innovation issues. In 2009, Alper was appointed as an officer of the Order of Canada, and in 2002, he was awarded the title of Officer, National Order of Merit by the President of the Republic of France. In 2014, President Napolitano of the Republic of Italy bestowed the significant recognition of Alper as a commander of the Order of Merit of the Italian Republic. In 2022, Alper was designated by the Companion of the Order of Canada the highest award represented to the Canadian citizen for his significant contributions to organometallic chemistry and his international recognized leadership in science, research, and policy. Also, I would like to present Dr. Sergio Alcocer. He is president of the Mexican Council of Foreign Relations, research professor of the National Autonomous University of Mexico, Institute of Engineering, and adjunct professor of the University of Texas at San Antonio. Alcocer is also the president of Mexico Exponential, a think tank for the development of public policy and strategies for embracing exponential technologies. He is former Undersecretary for North America in the Mexican Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Undersecretary for Strategic Planning and Technology Development and the Mexican Ministry of Energy. Alcocer is chair of Mexico City Advisor Committee of Earthquakes and Resilience and member of the Advisor Committee of Structural Safety. He's an international member of the U.S. National Academy of Engineering, a member of the Mexican Academy of Science and Fundación ICA, an honorary member and former president of the Mexican Society of Structural Engineering, and former president of the Academy of Engineering of Mexico. Alcocer was previously provost, coordinator for innovation and development, and the director of the Institute of Engineering at UNAM. He was also a non-executive member of board of Empresas ICA and chair of the board of Iberdrola Mexico. He has received an honorary degree from University of Arizona, and in 2023, he was awarded by the National Prize of Civil Engineering. Alcocer received his BS in Civil Engineering from UNAM and his PhD in structures from the University of Texas, Austin. So the floor is yours, Mr. Alcocer and Mr. Alper. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jorgana, for your very kind introduction. And it is my distinct pleasure to welcome Dr. Howard Alper to this webinar. And I would like to thank him for at least two reasons. First of all, for being here, but most of all, because he's on vacation. And like a good Canadian, he came to Mexico for a warm weather. And of course, he has had a very warm weather here in Mexico, much better than in Canada, I presume. And also because he's taking time from his vacation to talk about one of his very dearest topics, which is innovation. So thank you very much, Howard, for your time and for your passion and to talk about this very important topic. So he will show some slides, and so after some dozen of slides, we will have the chance to have some discussion and then to present the remainder of the slides and then to have a final discussion. But Howard, if you want to say something before I show the slides, you just tell me what we do.
Thank you, Sergio, Dr. Alcocer. And Georgiana, I really appreciated your kind words. And to the team that organized this event, I'm indebted to all of you. It's a privilege to have the opportunity to present at COMEXI. I'm just blocking out that I'm not speaking in Spanish, rather in English, unfortunately. And you will see, I think, as we go through this presentation, why research innovation is invaluable for economic advancement, prosperity, and the quality of life for the citizens of Mexico, Canada, and other nations. And thank you for your, both again, for your comments and Sergio's infectious enthusiasm is incredibly hard to resist. That is my personal experience in interacting with him. And so for me, it's really an honor to address the audience for COMEXI this afternoon. So what I would like to do is start with the first slide, and I'll give introductory remarks, as was mentioned, and explain what the talk is about. So we're going to discuss innovations, science and technology to hopefully accelerate economic advancement globally and in individual nations. What I would like to do is tell you about who is responsible for what roles in society, government, companies, industry, academia, etc. And what are their roles and how do they interact, or do they interact in an optimum way for the benefit of their country? And we'll focus here on Mexico and on Canada. Right? So what I would like to do first is on the next slide, slide 2, it describes the roles and the issue of agendas and strategies. Most nations in the world, poor, wealthy, or in between, in modern times must have science, technology, innovation, strategies, and agendas. Why? To create, as I'm reading part of this, but then I'm going to make comments and some suggestions. To create an ecosystem to encourage or foster innovation, science, technology, some people add commercialization, so as to enhance economic advancement and to improve societal well-being for all citizens. And to do that, we need to have national innovation strategies. And that requires strong consensus support, agreement from different stakeholders, industry, academia, and governments. Once you have these strategies, and develop an implementation plan and put it into action. You do that through programs and initiatives, but you also have to monitor on an ongoing basis the extent of success and the accountability, of course, in terms of financial issues, but also importantly in terms of fulfilling the goals and objectives that were described in the plans for the strategies moving forward. And different sectors of society have different approaches to strategies and agendas, or agendas and strategies. I've been fortunate in working with all three major sectors, floating from one to another and another, and involving people from all those sectors or just one sector only at a time. And what I've noticed is that probably the most conservative of all are academics, university professors. You must understand your community in order to hope to develop actions, strategies, and implement them in order to achieve success. So risk-taking by industry, what I call responsible risk, occurs in many cases, not all. Government is generally risk-averse, and as advisor to, I have to tell you, if you asked me 15 or 18 years ago, would I in my lifetime advise a prime minister for 8 years and then a head of state, a governor general, I would say that was impossible, unimaginable. And I've been incredibly privileged to advise both at different times, who are very different people with different strategies themselves and ways of governing, but who are wonderful to work with. And what's very important, in my opinion, is building consensus amongst the different stakeholders. Academics are the most conservative people of all. I'm not talking politically, I'm talking operation. Tell me what my teaching load is. What courses do I teach? What committee or committees should I serve on and why? And otherwise, leave me alone to do my research, secure funding, etc. Help me when I need help, and that's the way forward. So it's easy to be complacent, but that doesn't help anyone. And that is very important message across the three areas. So let's go to the next slide, the roles and responsibilities, and let's start with the industry, the private sector. If you look at the breakdown of the proportion of funding for research in the world, the majority is not from government, is not from academia, but from the private sector. Roughly 2/3 to, it used to be 2/3, 66, 67%. It's now up to, as you'll see on another slide, around 72 to 74%. So industry is very important. Why does industry pursue research in the company? Of course, I will talk about research in collaboration with university, with perhaps government lab, etc. But as noted here, the first bullet, it's to discover and invent next stage, next generation products, processes, and technology, as well as to innovate existing knowledge and commercial entities. It's driven by the need to be highly competitive, not on simply a local basis, although that is helpful in some cases, but at least on a national, if not global basis. And in the past 20 years, with the change of the impact of information technology, that has become truly overarching importance to be highly competitive on a global basis. In order to do that, the company, the firm, needs to know what questions to ask from a research and innovation perspective to position the company better, advantageously, using the outcomes as ways to accelerate or as springboards to future commercial industrial successes. I've been very fortunate over the years to run a research group of somewhere between 12 and 17 graduate students and postdoctoral fellows at the University of Ottawa in Canada in chemistry, one of the best departments in the nation in chemistry. And I had support from government agencies and from industry. At one time, as high as 7 companies from 7 different countries in the world, separate from the other support. And one that invested, if you like, a lot of money in what we were doing was British Petroleum in the UK, which supported us for really an unimaginable 18 years, ongoing. And the leader of BP for the world in research, the late David Smith, a wonderful person, he died 4 years ago. He came to Canada one year wanting to collaborate with other companies, as well as supporting people in university. And he asked me, can you come with me to meet these leaders, either the president, CEO, and the VP research or similar title, because you know the rules, regulations in your country very well, better than us. And I would rely on you for clarification on certain issues. So I went with him. And we spent several weeks, 3 weeks. And at the end of it, I said, David, what's your conclusion? And he said, not good. I said, why not? Well, 6 of the 7 leaders don't know what questions to ask from a research perspective. If you don't know what questions to ask, you're highly unlikely to allocate sufficient financial and other resources to succeed in the research that you want your firm to do. Very sharp comment, very perceptive comment. And he said, I bet your business schools, your management schools are not doing a good job educating and informing future leaders of companies. Why research is important, especially in areas A, B, C. I learned a lot from that exercise. So that's why, though, private sector invests in itself, aside from with universities and government. So the principles, the last bullet, apply to large, some medium-sized companies, small firms, usually startups, often do not do much research except focused on survival mode and succeeding and securing venture capital, angel, and other investment on the road or path to commercialization. Next slide, please. And Canada, for many, many years, has underperformed in business expenditure and R&D in the firm, right? As reported by OECD, the 35 or 6 industrialized nations. BERD, business expenditure and R&D, is tied, as the first bullet notes to product and process innovation and really productivity growth. For Canada, as a share of GDP, it declined from 2006 to 2020 from 1.1 to 0.86%. Its ranking went from 18 to 25 out of 38. Miserable, really miserable. We must do better. Certain industries are doing well. IT, information technology, pharma, biomedical is not bad, and a few others in energy and so on. But generally speaking, no. Where it does invest business outside the firm is in partnerships with universities. It ranks 8th in the world in business university partnerships. Why does it do so? Sometimes it does so for the wrong reason, because it uses that as an excuse to do less research within the firm, which is naive. I speak very frankly, always. Because you have to educate and inform your colleagues within the company why research on item 1 or area 2 or subject 3 is very important to the future well-being of the company. How is it going to become a younger company, a gazelle, growing 20 or more % a year, etc.? Next slide. So how does government support private sector? There are 2 types: indirect support and direct support. What indirect support means are tax credits for doing research and innovation. Canada, for many years, a generation, was #1 in the world in expenditure on indirect support to industry. So this is based not on the quality of the research, only on the amount of research. It's helpful in certain cases for minor improvements in innovation, incremental. Don't discard that. Incremental innovation has value. It's different than transformative innovation, new directions. Look at the IT sector, right, as one, but not only IT. Canada used to spend nearly $5 billion a year in indirect support. But then the council I had the privilege to chair gradually educated and informed the cabinet, prime minister, look, you're investing this enormous amount of money, but you're hardly increasing. In fact, you keep decreasing. The companies don't invest more in research. This is a major problem. The main beneficiaries of indirect support are consultants, not the companies. They prepared the documentation needed to get the funding as major beneficiaries. Important to understand. OECD recently made a comment. Effective R&D, that is indirect support incentives, is twice as large as the effect of basic and applied research, while the effect of direct funding on experimental development is half as large as the effect on basic and applied research. Next slide, please. Let's compare that with direct support, okay? Where direct support is quality, not quantity driven. New inventions and discoveries to benefit society. The plans, the applications come from companies. We're not talking about academia. They may involve partnering with academia. They may not at all. Canada's direct support to the private sector is lower than most industrialized nations. The ratio of indirect to direct support, quantity versus quality, is 3.3 to 1. The usual is at least 2 to 1 the other way, direct to indirect. And comment we made as a committee to the Prime Minister and Cabinet is your low level of direct support handicaps the competitiveness of Canadian business R&D. And firms conduct greater than 7, as I already said, greater than 70% of research, of total funding. In Canada now, there's a rather new fund or new title, Strategic Innovation Fund, for direct support. It's going up, but it needs to accelerate much faster. At a World Economic Forum at Davos, I was on a committee with the leaders of 4 of the biggest companies in the world to talk about IP protection, intellectual property. And we had dinner together, and at dinner, the leaders of 2 US firms were saying governments have the responsibility to share the risk for us, to invest boldly in leading edge transformative research. The US does. Canada has not demonstrated seriousness of purpose in this regard. Next slide. So we are making progress now, not fast enough, in changing the ratio of direct to indirect support, but we have a ways to go. What I wanted to do on this slide is look at the overall support for research and development by nations on a GDP, gross domestic product distribution. And this means the total expenditure. It's not just industry, it's not government, it's everybody, as said at the first 3 lines stated. The leader in the world is Israel. And I'm comparing it's almost a generation. The figures are for 2000, they're figures for every year, up to 2021, and for 1 or 2 countries, 2022. Some are not as far advanced in that regard for years. So the top 2 were not in the top 2 20 years ago. I remember going to Seoul, Korea the first time in 1985 to speak at a meeting of about 2,000 people, Asian Chemical Congress. The poverty was profound. Really heart-wrenching poverty. And it was led by a dictator, the father of a recent president of Korea, of Park, the daughter, who was subsequently impeached recently. But while I was there, everyone was glued to TV screens in windows of stores when the president, the father, announced that he was abandoning his position and that there would be free and fair elections. In other words, democracy would come. It was incredibly moving, people in tears and cheering and so on. And that country, in 13 years, transformed itself into one of the top 15 in the world, and now it's higher than that. And so it's not surprising it more than doubled from 2000 to 2021. If we look at Latin America, it's rather different. I'll just quote a few. Mexico, in 2000, 0.306. It went up a little bit, down, up, down. And the last figure I could find from the OECD is in 2017, where it's slightly higher than before, a bit higher. And in a previous leader had it even higher, over somewhere 0.6 to 0.75, if my memory is good. You will note that those are the last figures the OECD has given. There's been none in the current leadership that as far as I know. Chile starts slightly higher, but only in 2007. Figures were unavailable before. By 2020, it's 0.385. Chile has made progress on a number of fronts, but needs to invest appreciably more. And I want to come back to Chile later. Canada in 2000, you will see, was 1.858%. And went gradually up, kept going up. But by 2018, where it reached a peak, since then has been going down rather significantly. It was number one in the G8, and then when Russia was removed, in the G7 for 10 years in a row, from 2004 to 2014. Under Trudeau, the son, Justin Trudeau, up to 2018, it was number two, and then went to 4, to 5, to 6, and now it's competing with Italy to be at the bottom of the G7. You see Italy 1.483 and Canada 1.55. So we need to recover, and things look promising now, and I'll elaborate on that. With other of the so-called G7, US, Japan certainly have gone up, maybe not as dramatically as the first two. China's come from nowhere in 2000. Nowhere doesn't mean zero, but I mean has moved from 0.9% to 2.4%. And the OECD average has gone up, not overwhelmingly, but gradually, from 2.125 in 2000 to 2.7. So these figures are important to appreciate because it tells us roughly where we are. It's not perfect, but it's indicative. Next slide, please. The governments have the primary responsibility to support basic research and applied research, some by industry, but some by government. And it was in 1945, at the end of World War II, that Van Iver Bush, an engineer, issued a groundbreaking report to the US president called Science, the Endless Frontier. It's worth reading that book if you haven't. It made really a compelling case why governments need to support science. And it was he who encouraged the government to create the National Science Foundation, the first granting agency. While industry and sometimes foundations and individual philanthropists make important investments in university research and in other areas, health, hospitals, etc., the government has the overarching and means the overwhelming responsibility to support research and innovation in colleges and universities. That is true today as it was more than 60 years ago. Next slide, please. In Canada, in Mexico, you have CONACYT as the principal agency. Correct me if I'm wrong. In Canada, you have 3. One in science and engineering, one in health, which means health biomedical research, Canadian Institutes of Health Research, one in social sciences and humanities. And on the right are the budgets for this current year, which ends March 31st. That's why a new budget is coming shortly. And you can see the budgets for the first two are almost the same, completely different than the United States, where the National Institutes of Health overwhelms in size the financial support it gets from the government compared to National Science Foundation, and yet National Science Foundation has excellent support. And of course, Department of Energy in the United States also gives grants to you, and those are very significant as well. What I want to point out is the #1 granting agency in the world in terms of efficiency and effectiveness is NSCRC, #1. So 95.6% of its budget goes to the researchers for conducting research. 4.4 covers all their staff for all the operations, salaries, etc., etc. A remarkable figure. And it has kept at that level for several decades, within 0.5%. Recently means a dozen years ago or so, the three councils agreed to have multidisciplinary programs as well, which cover different areas. I remember going with the president of NSERC, Tom Brustowski, a wonderful engineer, to meet the top 20 under 40 in research in Canada for dinner. And I'm sitting waiting for it to start, and they said, why don't you ask these people, these accomplished young individuals, when they do research, do they look at it as a disciplinary effort? A chemist is a chemist and a civil engineer is a civil engineer, or do they look beyond in other areas, inter and multidisciplinary? And we agreed that 10 years earlier, 95% would say, I'm discipline specific. And at this dinner, 19 of the 20 people said just the opposite. That is, in this century, the typical starting assistant professor equivalent, generally, some have tunnel vision, yes, but they're a minority. A significant proportion look at things today from a transdisciplinary, let alone multidisciplinary. An ethicist with a population health person, with stem cell research, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So it's important to position agencies to be appropriate for the future, not for the past. In 1995, middle of 95, Canada had its last financial crisis, the debt crisis, DEBT. And one day the government announced cuts to the budget within government of 30 to 50%. Health, 42%. Industry, 35%. Other areas, energy, environment, and so on. Granting agencies, 14%. The first time granting agencies were cut since they were established many years earlier. And 6 weeks later, another 4%, so 18%. What happened was horribly challenging. People left Canada for other countries, not just the United States, but elsewhere. And even worse was what is termed internecine warfare. Biologists fighting physicists, engineers fighting within themselves, with scientists, with social scientists, and so on. So I was then in the Royal Society, the Canadian Academy, like Mexican Academy of Science, one of the principal people, and with two others, created a new organization called Partnership Group for Science and Engineering that was not going to lobby, whose role was to educate and inform decision makers. Right? We're there to provide ideas, not to complain. It's easy to complain. That gets you nowhere, especially when your budget's been cut like the numbers I told you. Come forth with new ideas. And so we were introducing ourselves. We brought together different societies and associations on a Sunday morning in the meeting room in the chemistry department, and 18 society associations got together and agreed to form this. It grew to 28. And the first person we went to see was the junior minister of science to educate him who we were. And we told him, we're here to work to find solutions. And he was very receptive. We had a 1-hour breakfast meeting, and we're not there to lobby or campaign. At the end, he said, I know you're not here to lobby, but could you tell me, how can we make a difference to the people of Canada? And my colleague who was from biotech industry and I said, well, the one area is infrastructure, facilities, equipment, and so on. We're at least a generation behind, not just the top 8 countries in the world, but how about the top 40 to 50? And he looked at us and said, that'll never happen in my lifetime, even though it's important, because in Canada, provinces are responsible for education, we're responsible for research, infrastructure is connected to education. It isn't, but we said, thank you very much. And a week later, with a similar 2-paragraph letter to this Minister of Industry, one of the most important ministers in the cabinet, asked us to come see him. We had a similar meeting, and he had 4 people in the room. John Manley. John Manley could have been Prime Minister of Canada. I used to joke with him when I got to know him well. You're the minister of almost everything. You've been Minister of Foreign Affairs, Finance, Skills, Industry, etc. And this is why it's a pleasure to meet you at that stage as industry. And at the end, he asked essentially the same question as the first junior minister. And my colleague said, infrastructure. And could you elaborate? We elaborated, and he said, oh, that's very intriguing. That is part of our responsibility. In order to do research in many fields, some fields no, but in many, yes, you must have state-of-the-art equipment, facilities, buildings, and so on. And he looked at 2 of his staff and said, you 2 work with these 2 to develop a plan. This was in late September of 1996, and in the February 4th budget of 1997, a multi-billion-dollar new initiative, as things got better, the cuts to granting agencies were restored, and a multi-million-dollar budget for creating the Canada Foundation for Innovation was announced. It was unbelievable, but true. We didn't name it. It's the government who names it. We named it, we told them about infrastructure. And even today, 28 years later, this is absolutely pivotal to support research in all the different sectors. Next slide. To quickly get to the last 3 of this part, this just illustrates, I asked NSERC to send me the recent budget, the actual figures. And you can see from 2019 to 21, it went up modestly. But in the last 2 years, it went down below what it was back in 2019. And so we hear expectations there are, but as I learned many years ago, budgets are not the budget until it's announced by the finance minister in Parliament. But that's coming forward. And next slide, please. Early career researchers, people who've never had a grant before. The 5-year average is $30,000. Those who've been in 5 years. Competition year 2023, 34,000. When I returned to Canada from the US in 1977 and had my first grant from the same organization, it was $10,000. That $10,000 is worth $54,000 in 2023. Shows you how far backwards. And for established researchers, 10 years or more, it's better, but not much better. So some of the secretaries in your Congress or in the US Congress in Canada called deputy ministers, people who run departments, I have not seen them so confident of forthcoming positive news as now. But we'll see if it's a reality. And the last slide of this first major part, I wanted to emphasize that while Canada has struggled at different times, what it hasn't done is failed the best of the new generation and of the leaders. I just want to show you quickly one slide. You can look up, you have the slides available. There is a young professor in his 5th year in my department of chemistry at Ottawa, Adam Schuhendler, a biomolecular chemist who's multidisciplinary, who does research in diagnostics for radiology diagnostics and medicine, in concussions, brain concussions, neuroinflammation, cardiovascular disease, kidney, lung cancer, which is not easy to detect many times in very early stages, hepatotoxicity. They published a transformative discovery a few months ago, January 25th, less than 2 months ago, that has had enormous publicity. And you can write to him. I told him I'm going to mention it today. This is not the first time Adam has had a lot of publicity. In June, the #1 magazine in the world, The Economist, published an article on another aspect of his research that is truly transformative. So this is truly a rising star, or has reached stardom in 5 years. Won a Killam Scholarship, will, I predict, win other international awards. So one is very proud of the achievement of young and not young people, more experienced people, but it's talking about critical mass. Does your country have sufficient critical mass of outstanding people to make a difference in the world on a scale where you feel you deserve to be? And knowing Mexico, I'm not an expert, but knowing some of its best, the best in Mexico are as good as or better than the best in it. So I'm going to stop here and ask for any comments, any questions, and then we'll complete the presentation in about 10 to 15 minutes.
Thank you very
Thank
much,
you.
Howard. I don't know if there are microphones open, or shall we pose the questions and comments in the question and answer box?
Staff? I'm going to look in the chat box. No, that's not a question. It's information.
But there is one question from Andrea Navarro. Dr. Alper, thank you very much for this splendid conversation, hearing from your experience and what you have said to the former President Piñera, why love can be compared with innovation.
That's what Piñera said to the audience. Right? I didn't say. I should comment now then. This opens the door to commenting. I asked Sergio if he would mind distributing the speech by the late Sebastian Pinera at the first Latin American summit in Santiago back in 2013. And I mentioned that in 2013, a month and a half or so before the meeting, President Piñera came to Ottawa, to the capital, on a state visit. And as, chair of the Science, Technology, Innovation Council and advisor prime minister, I get invited to state dinners. And I told the governor general at the time, can you do me a great favor? There's this meeting for Latin America, the first Latin American summit in Santiago. And they approached the president of Chile to give opening or welcome remarks to the audience. And he hasn't answered. And they've tried over and over again. And he's coming to Ottawa. Can you ask him? I didn't know these people. I knew them by name, but never met them. And I said, sure, I will do it. So the governor general says, when I get up from my seat to go to your table, you come to my table and sit in my seat and speak to Piñera's. And we spent 16 or 17 minutes talking. And I said, there's this meeting in your city, in your country, and Chile's taking leadership. And I'm fortunate, I've been invited to be a, keynote plenary speaker, to be a speaker along with some others. Could you possibly give opening remarks that would have a very strong impact? And he got out his cell phone and looked at it for a good 2 minutes. And then he turns to me and said, I will be there. And I said, thank you, sir. And that's how he appeared. And this speech he gave, there was no teleprompter. Those who read, no notes, no nothing. It was only in Spanish. That's an English translation. There's some mistakes. Ignore the mistakes. It's not Piñera's mistakes. It's a translation. But you get the flavor of, it was the most fantastic speech any of us heard. And David Johnston and Stephen Harper's, David Johnston said to me, this was a sterling speech, the best I've ever heard. And the Prime Minister said, what a magnificent, can you imagine? This guy, this person I spent hours with, he is trying to build a new Chile. He's trying to get more startup companies. It's marvelous. Chile opened an office, it's what's called Mars in Toronto, medicine. It's a startup area. The first country outside Canada to establish an office, establish partnerships with Canadian and global companies. So I thought that speech said a lot. Yes, it's like love, falling in love. Yes, that's absolutely true, what Piñera said. But read the rest of the speech, because it has at least as important, I'm not minimizing what love is or innovation, but the messages are very powerful messages.
Thank you very much, Howard. There are several questions. I don't know if you want to go over them right now or, for example,
Ask me one and I'll see if I can quickly answer.
well, Dante Torres asks, I want to ask Dr. Alper, what does he think about starting with a little interdisciplinary innovation and thinking laboratory in a university, including teachers, researchers, and students?
Sorry, I missed. What type of research at the beginning?
He said a little interdisciplinary innovation and thinking laboratory.
Oh, as a multidisciplinary
Yeah,
initiative. I would say this is a very personal view, but I think we're living in really something akin to the Dark Ages, 500, 600, 700 years ago, right now in the world. Just think about it, what's going on in different countries, in different types of very authoritarian or worse leaderships. So it's a time of major challenges, but it can be a time of major opportunities. And educating and informing students and educating new PhDs and masters is very, very important. If you look at history carefully and read how the Second World War evolved, in 1938 in German universities, and in 2024 in universities in US, Canada, and elsewhere. It's the same hate situation that there was then. That is reality. And that cannot be ignored. And how people, yes, they can listen to Beethoven and Bach, but they can also kill thousands of people, including raping many women recently, right? So what defines a success? There is initiative in Canada, CFAR, Canadian Institute for Advanced Research. They had a program building successful societies. And the person who asked the question, I'd recommend read the reports from that multidisciplinary initiative. How does one build a successful society? From a legal, social, engineering, really transdisciplinary initiative. And so I think can make a powerful initiative. Okay?
thank you very much. So shall we move on the remainder?
Yeah, let's move through the rest quickly because
All
I
right.
just want to give you a digest of what's happening that's encouraging, that really is encouraging. So in the last 2 years, 3 years, several new initiatives have been, and this is relevant to any country, and I think Mexico needs to seize opportunities here to partner with Canada. One is these are the tri-agency funds, right? From the three granting councils. And they created the New Frontiers in Research Fund, NFRF. Please look it up. And there are three types of grants. Exploration, these are for only 2 years, for people to put together excellent ideas for much longer than 2 years, and which they can get much larger funding for. You have as little as 2 people, or you could have many more. Next slide, please. I won't go through every line, but if you want to build a real team of, let's say, 12 to 30 people from around the world, I'm not talking Canada. Of course, you have a nominated principal investigator means the leader. Then there's co-principal and there's applicants and collaborators. You'll find it on the website for NFRF. Important is the third paragraph. You can be an independent researcher, you may be a policymaker, an educator, a healthcare administrator, indigenous elders, knowledge keepers, community leaders, working for a charity. This is very interdisciplinary. Brings together all parts of society in principle, depends on the proposal. So these initial funds are small. For the first 2 years, 125,000 a year. But, next slide. What you want to do is have a transformational grant. Large-scale support for Canada, but with partners elsewhere. Strengthen leadership. Never mind, you can read what they need to include. I read you the co-applicants, the others. Early career researchers are important. This is direct, wants to nurture in Canada and abroad, building critical mass and more of early career researchers as well as achieve. These are valued at $2 to $4 million a year for up to 6 years. In the first competition, they gave out only 7 awards. They've given out many more since. One was to my former student, Kathy Crudden, one of the best chemists in the world, organic chemist. She's at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. She has $24 million. She has people from Finland and other countries. I just picked up, I can't remember them all. You can look on her one. And the other 6. But since then, there have been more announcements and many more in different areas. Mexico needs to be part of the action. They have expertise in energy and bio, in agriculture, and so on. Okay. Next slide. And there's one slide missing. If you could go back, if not, I know it. There it is. International. I re-emphasize that. And there are 2 mechanisms in the international one. One which goes through major global platforms, like the first was dedicated to Horizon 2020. I'd like to see one dedicated to this hemisphere. But more important, I would argue, more valuable, is that your researchers who do research and innovation and relevant to the subject matter, they're not joining after. They're joining to prepare the proposal, right? The first time it had to be done quickly, and some of them were joining after. But in the last 2 announcements, the people were involved from day one, whether they're in Sri Lanka, Brazil, Chile, I know of, South Africa, Kenya, Senegal, and so on. Next slide. I just want to mention a couple other older programs and one more new program, like NFRF. Canada Research Chairs started 24 years ago. 2,200 chairs across Canada. Junior and senior, tier 1 and tier 2. Next slide. And you can get them renewed. And this is the distribution of chairs, equal number to 2 the granting council and about a little over half to social science humanities, because that community is smaller. And they set aside a certain number for small institutions to make sure that the best within them are recognized. Next slide. Well, I summarized it already. So the institution gets at least 200,000 a year for 7 years. The institution will add research money to, the person can get additional money. You can be extremely prosperous or well positioned in your research. So tier 1 are for full professors or associate, soon to be promoted to full. Next, the other are tier 2 chairs, which are people who are emerging researchers. 100,000 annually the institution receives, but then it has its own money, and the Canada Foundation for Innovation may give them a lot of money, whatever they can justify, millions for their research, for the instrumentation, part of the building, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide. There's one other program, I won't go over it, Canada Excellence Research Chairs. These are just a small number of higher funded chairs. Let's move on so we finish. 22. Go to 23, please. And that just describes the budget for a chair. So overall, this is a small budget item, 20 million compared to the others. Next slide, and nearly the last. So the other big fund, in addition to NFRF, which has foreigners involved, is the Canada First Research Excellence Fund. And here are the 5 priority areas, and they're very broad, in my opinion, too broad, but that's okay. Sustainable food systems, food agriculture, clean and resource rich, technologically advanced, resilient communities, healthy Canadians, but it's not just Canadians. Next slide. Oh, no, don't. Do you know this fund first started on a pilot basis, 2015-16, with some money. But when it was reintroduced, and basically as a new program, in 2022, $1.4 billion over 7 years, up to 200 million a year. For example, at Ottawa, in health, brain and heart research specifics, they get $100 million a year for 7 years. The highest grant in the country to Toronto, 200 million. But it doesn't mean Toronto only or Ottawa only. They're giving significant funding to foreigners working in their country. And they also have money for people to go back and forth between the countries. Next slide. So these are the last 2 slides. So what I tried to do was to give you rationale, raison d'etre for supporting research by different stakeholders, different partners, and the challenges and the opportunities. 2, build mutually beneficial partnerships, collaboration between researchers at different universities, universities with industry, sometimes industry with industry or government, on national and international basis, including Mexico and Canada, to catapult transformative research, especially in multidisciplinary, like NFRF and the Canada First Research Excellence Fund. The key to success is national leadership. Whether you're the president of Mexico, the president of UNAM, the president of a small company or big company, you're pivotal to the future success. You need people who give you bold new ideas as well as yourself having ideas. You need piñeras, yes, but you also need regular folk who come up with brilliant ideas. And that's where I referred to Sebastian Piñera. And I think the last slide, next slide. Sorry, I'm over time a bit. Create new opportunities to attract and retain researchers, especially expatriates We bring back to Canada people who left Canada, whether it's 2 years ago or 22 years ago. South Africa does the same, by the way. So do some others. And I reiterate, Joint Research Center. I remember discussing with a previous finance minister, who is the leader of innovation in the government of Canada, even more creative than the Minister of Industry and Research. And I said to him, building partnerships that are mutual benefit to both countries will accelerate development of new companies, new universities, new schools. Education is the bedrock for the future. Without an excellent kindergarten to grade 12 system, there's little hope of reaching the top. You may do better than you are now. But so education, research, development, and innovation are key to the future of a nation. And so I hope this was useful and interesting. And I will close on Piñera. I also met 3 times in several years Michelle Bachelet, who made her important contributions, and who one day for 1 hour, she and I talked only about intellectual property. And she wanted to know, is what my team is telling me and what outside is telling me, is this up to date? Is this at the front of the line? And I said, President, what I learned from you today was remarkable. And I think you have every reason to go forward with confidence. And Piñera, 2 days after the meeting in Chile, I spent 1.5 hours at the Intercontinental Hotel in a room off the lobby with his bodyguards outside, having a fantastic discussion. And I told him, your talk on innovation, I didn't know about my prime minister and head of state, what they thought. I said, I can tell you that audience was really moved by your talk without any notes, without any prompts. It was an unforgettable experience. So I'll close on that. And thank you very, very much for giving me this opportunity to connect with you.
Thank you very much, Howard. I think it has been a very inspiring, a very interesting presentation. I don't know if you still have some time for a couple of questions.
Sure.
There is one from Nieves Corro. She asked, if you had to choose one trigger for innovative thinking, which one would you say it is?
I think personally, I've had over 200 PhD students and postdoctoral fellows in my career. And I've had people who've had a range coming to me of a range of backgrounds from different countries all over the world. I had few Canadians in my group, as little as 3 out of, let's say, 15, 16 to 6, usually 3. I also had another unusual characteristic at that time when you go back 40 years ago. In chemistry, there were 13% women grad students, and I had nearly 50% throughout my career. And I learned, how to mentor, and mentorship is absolutely key. Talking about triggers, because giving people confidence in themselves, those who don't have it. Some have too much confidence and need to be brought down to earth. They may be very bright, but there's still much to learn, right? And you may go down new paths you never thought about. The initiative I lead now for the country, Global Excellence, last president of University of Toronto, #1 university in country, said, Howard, I want you to come back to Toronto. You spoke to us, the senior administrators, some young people, like 35 to 40 people about this initiative, because we were doing so badly as a country in international words prizes, because we didn't apply. We didn't get nominated. You get zero chance. We're very not assertive. Anyway, to answer your point, I started mentorship at the University of Ottawa, which there was a lot of pushback in the mid-'80s. 18 months later, every single department, center, institute had mentorship. I mentor right now 14 people in the world. 11 are women. They range from 17 to 58, including several household names in Canada. They too have their challenges and their this and that, their opportunity. So the trigger is to people with low self-esteem, as the University of Toronto president said, you must come back and talk only to women. We're going to choose 14 of the best women in the universe. And over half, I concluded after the first half hour, had low self-esteem, even though they won a few awards. And building self-esteem is crucial, not only for women, but for men too. So it may not be what you wanted as the answer, but that is a precursor to going to the next stages that you and I may be thinking about as first, right? Which are the key areas? Where are the opportunities for the future? How do you make a quick beginning in something you never thought could be useful to society or tomorrow or in 30 years? Thank you.
Thank you, Howard. Let me ask you one question. I know you are involved in several committees, Blue Ribbon groups, and you mentioned it in South Africa, in other African countries, in Latin American countries, and then you sort of hinted what Mexico needs to do, and of course, partnering with Canada would be a prime solution. Of course, we need leadership, as you mentioned, but assuming that we have that leadership, what else do you think Mexico has to do, or what would be the position of Mexico vis-a-vis other countries based on your experience, on what you have seen from Mexico and South Africa and Poland and the countries that you have visited?
Yeah. Sergio was talking about South Africa. A couple of months ago, I finished chairing a group only of South Africans. I found that very unusual because when I've done it with other countries or within my own country, it's usually about 50, 60% from that country and the rest from different countries. But actually, I was very impressed by the overall quality of the South Africans, the 8 or 9 people with me. And they issued an outstanding report. It still has to be made public and action and so on. But I think a country like Mexico, knowing its capabilities, knowing its talent, or some of its talent, not all of its talent, I think there are a number of things very quickly to do. And you've done some part of this in the past, sometimes reporting to the wrong person. And that's not just a Mexican issue, it's other countries. So one needs an advisory council to the president. no one else. To a minister, very nice. But often in Canada years ago, it was to a junior minister who doesn't even have the power of a regular senior minister. And what made that council so successful, the prime minister, when he brought me in saying, you know, I'm here to offer you chair of this committee that I am forming. And here's why. But I'm running it different than previous approaches. You and your committee are at the service of me and my government. In other words, you respond to advice questions from us. You don't say, oh, here's an idea, go with it. It may be a good idea. Let that person go speak to one of my ministers or two or me, and we'll decide whether it's that. In other words, your agenda is our agenda. You could disagree, you could agree, you could do this and that. As the Swedish Innova agency, the innovation agency of Sweden, did a study comparing advisory councils, and their comments on the council I was chairing are truly remarkable, saying, you know, the success rate of this committee was, at the time I finished, 73% of the advice was accepted and implemented. And I remember dealing with John Holdren, Obama's advisor. We got along extremely well together. And he said, Howard, it's luck if it's 25%. Why? Because they're always telling Obama and cabinet, no, this is more important. We want to give you advice on this. So I think that was a brilliant stroke by the leader of the country. And Vinova said, your State of the Nation reports published every 2 years, which compares Canada to the world, really are invaluable. And the finance minister one day called me in and said, our next budget's going to be next week. I want you to tell your committee that your last State of the Nation report helped shape the future of this country. I said, oh my God, Minister, can I say it in those words? Absolutely. And that was remarkable. So very important. Then I think, I mean, from my experience, that ministers need to, so you have the president and this council reporting to the president. And ministers can raise issues. So any single minister, and I'll give you examples, environment, energy, skills, foreign affairs, finance, came to us for advice, not just the prime minister. As he said, any of my people can come, not just me. Sometimes all of us come. It's a cabinet decision. Sometimes not. That was the other brilliant idea. So I wanted to cover that because I think those two ideas were essential for the success of the enterprise. I think other things is relationship between granting agencies and government and academia and industry. And we have that in our report to South Africa without revealing things. There is a comment. Say government and university need to treat each other with dignity and respect. They don't understand that. And the same with the corporate world and government. And if you don't, you create all kinds of obstacles, barriers that are totally unnecessary, rather than looking at things as opportunities First time I ever went into the Prime Minister's office, I was given 15 minutes because somebody, the head of NATO, I served on the NATO Science Committee. NATO Science does no military research, none. Find better stained glass for church windows, please, was one funding, one project fund. Anyway, the leader of NATO said he's going to meet Prime Minister of Canada, Chrétien. Could you do me a favor and tell him that this is what I want to talk to him about? Three things. One of which, you illegally pulled out of funding this committee. You can't do that. Oh, really? I said. And this was to his chief of policy. We were supposed to meet for 15 minutes. We met for an hour and 3/4. And at the end, she says to me, "You're the first academic to come in here who in 5 minutes doesn't reduce the issue he or she wants to talk to me about from the issue that's university-wide or whatever to personal. Could you tell the presidents of universities that they're here on behalf of their community and not themselves? Second, could you tell them, do not come to us and talk in acronyms. We're not your deans. Can you imagine? I had to do that to a meeting of all the presidents. And on the first issue, it was okay. But on the second one, some comment, how dare she say that to you? We can say what we want. I said, don't shoot the messenger. I'm just relaying it to you. But I'm going to also tell you, how do you expect to educate, inform, and convince leaders and people who report directly to the leader on issues if they don't understand what you're saying? So I come back to leadership. And I think those general issues may sound fuzzy. They are not fuzzy issues. They impact how we behave. How we behave impacts actions too often, actually, in my experience. And the other piece of advice, and I mentioned it, I noticed sitting with ministers who brought me in on meeting different people where they said, I don't know everything about this issue. Could you just sit and listen? Which I did. They were most impressed when somebody, where not appropriate in all cases, but in many, when a person from industry brought an academic and a person from academia brought an industrialist with to discuss issue A, B, or C.
Thank you very much. I think we are up to the limit of our meeting. I don't know if is there any other comment, Georgiana? I'll give the floor back to you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Alper, and thank you so much, Dr. Alcocer, for joining us today. It was such a pleasure to have you both with us, and we hope to see you soon in a different platform here with us in COMEXI.